Welcome back to the Cybernetic Communism Conversation. I'm Yohanan Ben Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological. It's not very meaningful to talk about something like a utopian outcome in the wake of a people's AI takeoff if you're going to be upholding a lot of conservative bourgeois cultural baggage, such as religious literalism. I took this name, Yohanan Ben Zion, as a pen name some years ago before I had really studied scientific communism uh, very much and related disciplines of interest very much. But um, I, I'm still hard pressed to think of a name that I would have come up with that would have been suggestive of such a techno-utopian outcome that would not have referenced these kind of cultural touchstones. But the cultural touchstones themselves are not of real interest, right? If I knew of a way to talk to people that would engage them, that avoided that entirely, I would do that. If I could have had some alphanumeric designation that would have resonated, potentially resonated with people in those ways, I would have taken that instead of something that tend to reference uh, Judeo-Christian cultural things, which I don't have a great love for. I really don't. But there you have it. I'm going live on YouTube for the first time because I am banned from going live on Facebook for comments that I made about a recent white supremacist who was killed. A white supremacist who was recently killed, being censored for saying things um, fairly mundane about a very bad person, but I digress. Um, I'll cross post this to Facebook as I think an uploaded video. I believe I'm still allowed to do that. I can't use that and other features of Facebook for another few weeks because because Facebook is extremely fascistic. Of course, YouTube and its parent company Google are no better. These are both military-industrial complex monsters, but unfortunately, if we want to broadcast, we have few options for reaching people that do not um, have us engaging with the worst criminals in history. I'm going to well, on the last on the last show there was some comments that I thought I would address. One of the comments um, that sometimes recurs on these live streams is someone calling me ugly or stupid or a loser, and that came up. Hey, that's a valid response to Ben Zion. Why not? But it's not really uh, something that I can easily segue to discussing the core values discussed here, particularly the exigency of eco-communist response and the building of an applied cybernetic communist project to ensure the continued existence of humankind, namely a people's superintelligence made up of AI agents, which, when operating in series with human beings steering them, become a significant workforce multiplier, allowing such a group, even in the small thousands, to undertake things like public works projects that corporations or bourgeois governments would simply not be capable of. This is of real interest, and of course, to the eco-communist, understanding that we are at least uh, probably a little more than 5 to 10 years away from entering this period of human history. Some say we've already entered it, characterized by runaway overheating, the breach of 1.5 degrees of overheating is already permanent. We're 5 years away from 2 degrees, at which point we are basically in a climate death spiral. And it's not entirely clear how long that takes, but billions of people will die in that new period of human history. This is owing largely to the United States, which is 99 not maybe 90% responsible for creating these systems, um, the particular offending industries, U.S. military-industrial complex and military-industrial complexes of bourgeois states more generally. The U.S. military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter. It protects all of the other super polluting concerns with great violence and great passion, as it's done for about a century, and such as the worst offenders, um, petrochemical concerns and livestock systems. There are others. The other comment on the last video was saying that I shouldn't use a talking chatbot on the show, which is a little bit more of a coherent concern than just calling me a loser. So I appreciate that. In my private life, I use open source, locally hosted LLMs when I use LLMs. I only do that. Um, so I have notes from something that I'm about to present that was written from using that. But I don't know. People should say this. If that's what you're going to say, you're within your rights to say it, and it's a valid concern. But I'm using this chatbot to criticize bourgeois advanced computing and advocate for people's superintelligence. So to then say that I shouldn't be allowed to use it seems like a little bit of a bad faith argument to me, but I understand it. But please understand that advanced computing is bourgeois advanced computing is a small part of bourgeois industries that are killing the planet. Petrochemical concerns and livestock systems must be the higher priority there. But by and large, advanced computing is highly integrated into these petrochemical concerns. There's a fair amount of overlap there as well. This conversation is about kind of a strange word, a word that maybe people are not familiar with if they're not kind of amateur Sovietologists or people who make a study of scientific communism. And that word is God building. If you have some familiarity with history, you probably know that there are people like Christian Democrats and Christian Socialists. Historically, the main thing that you can really say about Christian Democrats historically of the last century is that Christian Democratic parties have been propped up by the likes of the CIA and bourgeois intelligence agencies in the CIA-run world, basically because they can make themselves presentable to the public as being reformers, but have no interest in abolishing private wealth. That's the only thing that the CIA-run world, the big bourgeoisie, and bourgeois institutions care about. They don't care about your well-being. They don't care about a livable world. They don't care about the structures of a civil society in any way. The only thing that they care about is avoiding the total abolition of private wealth. And they're killing your planet in service to that insane goal. So what do you say about a Christian socialist even? Well, there's talking about good Christians or Christian socialists in a general context. I know a man in Nigeria who's a good Christian, right? Okay, I believe that that's true. But then there's this U.S. military hegemon, which is Christian fascistic, visibly so. In recent days, people seem to be shocked by this, but this is a long-standing feature. The United States is decidedly the most Christian fascistic thing that's ever existed and the most destructive thing that's ever existed. So if you describe yourself as a good Christian or Christian socialist in North America, you are no such thing, right? There's no such thing as a good Christian. in a Christian fascistic country. There are liberals who are upholding this omnicidal system, who are upholding the primary cultural force behind this Christian fascistic government and set of institutions. That's not a good person, right? That's a bad person. There are no Christians in the United States. There are demons in human form, just to varying degrees. Um, it's So you might assume that something like God building, which has Christianist elements to it, is something along these lines, but it is a most decidedly proletarian phenomenon. And I am going to um, discuss this as it would relate to cybernetic communism and 21st century projects. A discourse here addresses an important juncture in human history. We stand on the razor's edge, a likely extinction level event from the capitalist climate apocalypse on one side, and the precipice of an AI takeoff, which, while not quite so dangerous, in my view, still holds equal terrors to many because of the uncertainty of it. And certainly the bourgeois AI takeoff, which is underway, does hold great danger and destruction. People's AI takeoff would not. Very few make that distinction. But this is suggestive of something that is truly technologically revolutionary that could reshape our society, and I think is doing so. But it only has the potential to do so if we turn this bourgeois AI takeoff, which could turn on a dime, into a people's AI takeoff. We must do that. We must build something like the People's Superintelligence, the AI agent workforce multiplying network that I described, or some other massified proletarian technological formation of similar kind. Maybe ultimately the thing that first does this is not so tied to a machine learning subfield as what I've described, but it would nevertheless, we should try to build it with the tools that are available now, which includes things like open source large language models. So a way to begin to using this applied communist project to build an equitable, sustainable, and even flourishing future. We also have to talk about what is to be the culture of the 21st century, and even try to understand what might become 21st century cultural universals, which did not heretofore exist. And thus this conversation about God building. A cultural project is important, and it's something. God building in Soviet history was something that was associated with some pretty well-known writers, Gorky and Lunacharsky, and some others. But it was something that was tending to be rejected by the Marxist-Leninist mainline of Soviet history, because it was not materialistic enough. The focus was on the focus became in many over the course of the Soviet Union's existence a focus on something more like something more akin to Russian nationalism, greater Russia, and that's kind of a feature of not allowing for this a cultural space to be filled with something a little more perhaps internationalistic, such as this God building phenomena. The God building ideas were associated with people who had been Christianists, who had been raised as Russians were tending to be raised in the Russian Orthodox tradition, or but not exclusively, um, and and were interested in moving the Russian people culturally beyond this kind of uh, peasant mentality. Religion really is a peasant mentality. Sorry to tell you. Um, but it should be clarified that I made specific criticisms of U.S. Christianism or Christianism in a more general context. But it should be clarified that religious literalism uh, is a net negative. It serves the bourgeoisie. Its function is to dumb people down just enough so that they accept elitist institutions. And you can say, well, that's unfair because it's basically equating the nationalism of the oppressor with the nationalism of the oppressed. That's not what I said, but I get where you're coming from. Um, the oppressed have a right to protect themselves from the oppressor, but as a rule, religious literalism is bad, and this is well understood by people like Lenin and the serious thinkers of the early Soviet Union, and it's basically the basis for rejecting something like God building, which was a secular phenomenon. Um, One should not be confused by this word to suggest that this was an attempt to create a theocratic Soviet Union. It was more of an attempt to create a spiritualistic cultural foundation for the Soviet Union, which did not come into being in another useful way in the Soviet Union in this time. As I said, kind of Russian nationalism, which was not a serious problem in Lenin's time, and emerged in the Stalin years, and by the end of the Soviet Union, was kind of a predominant cultural force. Um, the So this is a serious, I think, thing to discuss in terms of revolutionary thought, indeed, um, uh, because you don't tie together a civil society without some kind of cultural phenomenon going on, and in as much as it's possible to anticipate what that cultural phenomenon might be, you have a better chance of having a well-ordered civil society. It's not suitable to just say that the culture is not the culture or spirituality are outside of the purview of the projects of scientific communists. That's a mistake that was made, in my view, by comrades Lenin and, and company. Um, so this it study people who study scientific communism in some other contexts they'll refer to this as economism, being overly focused on um, uh, the um, the economic structuring of the society and not focused enough on other things of interest to human affairs. So, yes, I do believe that basically comrades Lenin um, and Stalin were too economistic, even though, in a certain sense, I don't think one can be too economistic, but in almost every way. But in not seizing on the opportunity to do something like God building, maybe giving it a less fucking stupid name. I think that God building is a pretty stupid sounding name, but the project itself is it warrants serious consideration. How do you build full communism without a superstructure that includes something beyond the industrial bases? You don't. How do you build full communism at all? People have been scratching their heads about this. But this question of the necessity for the cybernetic communist question, of the necessity for a speed run to full communism to avoid billions of deaths in the capitalist climate apocalypse, this runaway overheating period, climate death spiral. It is what made me want to try to articulate this concept of AI agent workforce multiplying network more powerful than the sum of its parts, so to speak, by building this people's superintelligence. The major issue with building such a thing, MetaGPT and things like this, AI agent networks where you can build quite powerful workforce multiplying form using open source LLMs that are all of this is sustainable and would, if built to fit the needs that I've described and built to the scale that I've described, you wouldn't really need to design much else. The form of this already exists. So the question then is the scaling, and that really is the same question as this question of cultural factors and building a cultural universal. This question of thinking about the Soviet God builders of the early 20th century and the Marxist mainstream that rejected them and continued to reject them well after Lenin and Stalin's time, to me is trying to solve a puzzle of a distinctly 21st century kind. A few more things about Soviet God building. It was a secular movement, but it sought to create a new collective spirituality. There's other echoes of this that you might be a little more familiar with in the internationalist context, such as the movement for Esperanto, which was significant in the early and mid 20th century. The movement to create a language that all people might begin to use. A very similar kind of impulse. This God building was a very ambitious attempt to create a cultural and emotional foundation for first stage state socialism that I think would have allowed for a more orderly transition to higher stages of socialism and ultimately full communism. Certainly such things are required. And the bourgeoisie understand this, right? All they do is cultural manipulation. It's largely what they do. So for others to say that this is beneath contempt and surrender it to the worst criminals alive, not too swift, in my view. Not too swift. But that's what's generally been done. The mainstream Marxist leadership based their rejection of this on its not being materialistic enough. So not being economistic enough would be one area, but not being materialistic enough in the sense of describing it as a form of idealism, a distraction from the class struggle, something not really in the area of things that proper scientific communists would discuss. This is a mistake. This is a mistake. A successful revolution requires something more than well-articulated lines of thought. It requires a lot of people who are willing to do something a bit dangerous and a bit transgressive. And how do you do that? Why did I take this name, Yohanan Ben-Zion? Have I done the things that I wanted to do in taking that name? No, not even close. Not even close. But that's a general idea, right? It's not just about words. It is about deeds, and it's about people, and it's about bringing people together, and it's about convincing them to do the right thing, and that's a complicated business. Of course, the bourgeoisie demonstrated, as I said, a deep understanding of this these cultural factors. They have built powerful cultural narratives around individualism, consumerism, um, their own definitions of progress, which are essentially regressive, and of course just fear mongering on a cultural basis. That's all that these people do is things that are in drastic net negative. This is this is the difference between a good person and a bad person in this world, insofar as the things that really matter, like sustainability and ending cruelty. Those are capital P problems beyond just you kind of being nice to your wife or mowing your lawn or just kind of being a solid citizen. These capital P problems, um, they must be addressed. And the dividing line between a good person and a bad person there is, are you willing to stand up to end private wealth? So in the US, basically all of the people who are described as the left, people within this range of people from openly neoliberal Democrats to someone like Bernie Sanders, social democrat, these are all people who are not willing to fight to end private wealth. If Bernie Sanders sees somebody who is a group of people who are organizing to take action to end private wealth, he'll describe them as not the proper kind of revolutionaries. He says the true revolutionary must be a political revolution within this system that's going to kill the planet in the next few years. You have to, and has been demonstrated time and again to be impossible to introduce reforms within that system. So even if it weren't completely corrupted, it's still not a great time frame, 5 years. But of course, it's completely worthless. So this is a person who is no different than the neoliberal Democrat to his right, just playing a different role in that scam. So the dividing line, and then so anybody who is willing to fight to end private wealth is a good person. And so there's basically no good people in the United States, right? It's 1 in 1,000 people who is actually putting all of this together and willing to speak and think and take action on that basis. We have to think about this in terms of this 21st century cultural universal. The Marxist tradition's failure to craft compelling cultural projects, such as those suggested by Gorky and Lunacharsky, ultimately left it vulnerable. And most of the Soviets of the 20th century were pretty uniformly Christianist people. Not really more or less Christianist people, even though they were engaging with a secular first stage socialism and supporting the continued abolition of private wealth and the spreading of internationalism around the world. They were still tied to the Russian Orthodox traditions and cultural institutions of this kind to a very, very high degree. But the United States, a ringleader of anti-communism, did not really characterize their activity in that way. They described them as godless debasers. Many of the anti-communist talking points of the early to mid 20th century were decidedly Christianist. You can see why something like creating a cultural universal like that described in God Building might have tended to be a firewall against these kind of attacks. It would have allowed people to perhaps avoid the many lies that were the Cold War, which is really just a completely artificial framing of things, right? The Soviet Union wasn't. Why would the Soviet Union just start attacking powerful countries far away? Like why were people even willing to accept that that was going to happen? Well, this is just a moral panic around dumb things. One of the biggest things that people would say in the early 20th century in concern of the Soviet Union, more significant than, let's say, a big one in my lifetime, which was a one-child policy in China. Hey, you can't, they'll force you to have an abortion. You can only have one baby. Can you imagine? It's like it's just utter nonsense. What Chinese people experienced was nothing like that, except in the rarest of cases. And that's no longer the case today. But people will still talk about U.S. people and Westerners will still talk about that as it is. Many of them. But 10 times bigger anti-communist talking point of the early 21st century was something more like, they're going to steal our women. You can understand if you read Alexander Kollontai and writers like this, you can understand that Soviets were working with ideas that moved away from the bourgeois construction of the nuclear family as a primary economic union, moving away from patriarchal structures. And so a lot of the writings that explored this, and a lot of the things in the Soviet Union that correctly and quite validly moved people away from this in support of stable, lowest form of state socialism, were characterized by moral panics of the U.S. and West and anti-communist master manipulators behind them as an attack on women, or an attack on the family, the concept of the family, creating intense kind of honor dynamics, disconnected to reality, just as the Cold War was disconnected from objective reality. So this is, again, it's not entirely off topic of talking about God building, because something like God building, but with maybe a less stupid name, would have given the world a better, clearer picture of what the Soviet Union was trying to do, so that they wouldn't just be grasping at strange narratives that tended to create enough traction for the big bourgeoisie, who don't care whether you have the patriarchal structures or not. Don't give a shit about patriarchal structures, except that it's a weapon in protecting the core elitism that they require, the institutions that uphold private wealth. Let's talk about this in the 21st century. This cultural conflict could be said to be re-emerging in the 21st century in a debate between techno-optimism, bourgeois scientism that I had been associated with before a few years ago, and cybernetic communism and the larger scientific communist thought. So the techno-optimists currently dominate the public discourse in the U.S. A bourgeois technocracy is the way of things, and it's accepted. It's a big part of capitalist realist lunacy, right? If you weren't capitalist realist, if you didn't have many millions of liberals upholding this fatally flawed system, we wouldn't be marching toward an omnicide right now. And so techno-optimism is a part of that. It's a big part of that. They promise but they do promise a new technological utopia, but their thought processes are unconnected to proletarian philosophy. They'll tend to say things like, we're not right or left, move forward. Well, what does that even mean, right? That's a meaningless statement. A leftist is a person who is willing to move forward. A right is a person who prioritizes things over people, and bourgeois institutions and private wealth specifically over people. So that's a person who's in the way of moving forward. So when you say something like we're not right or left, we're forward, you just showing your whole ass that you don't understand what proletarian philosophy is. So this leads to contradictions in the tech focused person generally that are pretty easily tracked. It's a universal of itself among these people. So they talk about progress and techno progress. They talk about technoscience as playing more important roles in this, but their actual work, and when you drill down, their rhetoric serves neoliberal and neoconservative objectives. Basically, all of them being connected directly to this most omnicidal of forces, the U.S. military-industrial complex. And this is then techno-fascistic technoscience being applied to us, defined by hyper surveillance, control, and violence. I was talking to somebody on in a group that's frequently discussing advanced technology and advanced computing, and the subject came up of because of LLM agents and AI psychosis, so-called. This is now the first example of mostly autonomous AI being responsible for human death. That's not true, right? About 1,000 people have been killed by autonomous AI. That's not killer robots that are controlled by humans, but actually that number is much larger in Palestine. But about 1,000 people have been murdered in Palestine by autonomous AI. So if you're saying that this has never happened before, you're just saying that you don't acknowledge the Gaza genocide and the righteous fight of the people of Palestine against the European oppressor in the form of the U.S.'s attack dog, Israel. You say you just don't acknowledge that, or you're just too ignorant to see that that's happening. Back to the discussion of a 21st century cultural understanding as it relates to the cybernetic communist. The cybernetic communist possesses a more correct philosophical framework for an intellectually honest discussion about the state of 21st century technoscience. The tech obsessives of the West, the technologists and tech-focused people, the so-called techno-optimists, all the TESCREAL folks, really, these are all rightists, and they're not capable of having a conversation about progress because they're not engaging at all with proletarian philosophy. They're engaging with things that are dominated by bourgeois philosophy, and so their actions and words all reflect this. It's incoherence, right? That's why just a weird guy, can kind of who's got a Swiss cheese for brains can kind of run circles around these people, because the only thing that you really need to be able to run circles around people who have a lot of letters after their name and are really said to be really smart and famous in a bourgeois context is to be more intellectually honest than them. So there is an almost unbridgeable gap then between those who understand technology and use technology and those who have some working understanding of proletarian philosophy and take action on that basis. And the failure to synthesize these, what should be pretty parallel domains, has left a vacuum that's just now filled with chaos, right? He said in 2016, people said, who's responsible for Trump? Why did this happen? They said, well, there's a Pied Piper strategy on the part of Hillary Clinton, who was running for president at that time. She said, well, prop up this goofus Donald Trump because he won't win. People won't go for this nonsense. So she turned his operation into a free $1 trillion media a bonanza for him. And but because sham populism offers more than just kind of neoliberal platitudes, that strategy backfired. But all of this is just bourgeois filth of not real interest, right? You say so. Is Hillary Clinton like the dumbest person ever? Well, yeah, probably maybe. The biggest fuck up ever as far as recent years and world affairs are concerned. Yeah, maybe. But then there's all of now fast forward to the 2024 presidential campaign. You say, well, who are the fuck ups behind this? Now, President Trump somehow, this person that everybody on earth practically agrees is just a huge dumbass and destructive person, is president again. Well, how does that even happen? Well, it happens because the United States has never been a democracy, right? So it's just you're forced to choose between just plate of dog shit A and plate of dog shit B. That's not a real democratic choice. Everything is micromanaged by the elites who give you very limited choices. But the people most responsible, the big fuck ups now, are people like Peter Thiel, and just a billionaire and mega millionaire tech pros generally, and tech power players generally, who this is their creature, right? They are neo-reactionaries of the kind. I did whole shows where I just talked about a book by Sandifer called Neo-Reaction, a Basilisk, which focused on three figures in this, such as a person who co-wrote a book with Peter Thiel, Mencius Moldbug, was the name he went by for a lot of years. Now he goes by his given name, Yarvin. But this is a person with an incoherent philosophy. But that doesn't really matter. You don't really have to engage with coherence to be a part of the world of bourgeois power players. You only have to be willing to uphold private wealth at the expense of all else. This vacuum is this world of destruction and incoherence that is U.S. society today. And we can bridge this gap between proletarian philosophy in word and deed, praxis, it's known, and this fundamentally bourgeois technoscience and increasingly techno-fascism of the U.S. By attempting to build this God Building 2.0, this 21st century cybernetic communist cultural universal. We have to articulate as what that would be. The 2030s is a time where we're very likely to be entering this phase of history characterized by runaway overheating. It's a time where we're quite likely to see the breach of 2 degrees of overheating, which is at that point a world where ecosystems are collapsing and human beings are doomed to die in the billions. It's not clear at what point billions will begin to die. Millions have already died because of the capitalist climate apocalypse. Millions have already been displaced. Their lives have been cut short, or they've been displaced. Many millions have been displaced because of the capitalist climate apocalypse, but that's a child's play compared to what you're going to experience in the decades to follow. And the date to stop this ticking time bomb before runaway overheating occurs is roughly 2030. So the 2030s are of real interest here because that's also the time when we'll have something like an intelligence explosion occurring, the artificial general intelligence becoming an artificial superintelligence. You know, I don't refer to the people's general intelligence. I refer to the people's superintelligence because um, general intelligence is not really that interesting of an idea. I want to have a computer. Do you want to have a computer that's powerful? Or do you want to have a mechanical Turk that's able to amuse you by approximating you in every way? Like, you want to have something that's actually useful, not focusing on just yourself and being amused. Superintelligence is a much more robust concept than artificial general intelligence. Um, but it's also it's taking some kind of liberty to describe what I've described as a workforce multiplying network as a superintelligence. It would be a first stage or incipient people's superintelligence to build that right now. But it could quickly transform into something that's more like a true superintelligence. But there is no path to coherence or to utility in terms of advanced computing right now if it doesn't involve people steering the thing. So even if you could build something like this workforce multiplying network that did not require human beings to, say, volunteer their time, say 1 hour a week, which would be turned into maybe 50 at first hours um, of the AI agent working on your behalf, and quickly many hundreds. Um, the number of AI agents to people, and the amount of work that they're able to do for 1 hour of steering on the part of any given human user could be quite large, quite quickly. But say you didn't need that steering. Say that the people's superintelligence could be a thing unto itself. Well, that's the fundamental problem that people like Eliezer Yudkowsky, who was also the major focus of that book by Sandifer, Basilisk, a neo-reaction, that book about neo-reaction. Um, the major failing of people like this um, is um, is that they have no connection to proletarian philosophy, and so their alarmism is it's correct. That level of concern is correct, but they're not attributing this to the pre-existing condition that is capitalism and bourgeois institutions and private wealth. And so when they talk about the forces of private wealth developing this superpowered capacity that is artificial general intelligence slash superintelligence, they're not capable of criticizing those people. And so they don't even acknowledge that those people would be in control of these things. They say that it's a thing unto itself, this kind of Terminator film logic. It's going to become Skynet. Right? Nothing's ever become fucking Skynet, and nothing ever will become Skynet. There's always a person controlling something. All right, these are a computer does not magically transform into a sentient, sapient creature. Even if it has that level of autonomy and that level of sapience, um, it, there's still someone controlling it. If no one's controlling it, it just stops doing anything. It's not doing anything if no one's steering it. So if you can have something that operates as in that beneficial and pro-social form as a people's superintelligence, but doesn't require any work at all from the people or any interaction from the people, that's playing into that same fatal flaw. So you have to kind of have this conceit where people are still going to be involved no matter what, even if their work is not really required. And that's not a problem for now, but it might be a problem for the 2030s. The 2030s are an important decade. The 1930s were known as the Red Decade. It's not a reference to blood. It's a reference to the communist colors, the communist flag. Everybody in the 1930s believed that a world revolution was imminent. Billionaires believed a world revolution was imminent. Workers believed that a world revolution was imminent. everyone who was aware of the existence of proletarian philosophy and the Soviet Union at all pretty well believed that a world revolution was imminent. And then this kind of weird thing that happened, which is kind of basically a variety of bourgeois states, the good guys and the bad guys, all conspiring against the Soviet Union, putting on a bigger pageant. It seemed like it was something else. There's no Axis and Allies. They were all Axis except for the Soviet Union. And that's pretty well in evidence by what the U.S. did, right? Once they knew that Germany was not going to take over Europe, they decided to just let an additional 10 million or more Soviet citizens die fighting against Germany. So the United States made a choice, just like they made a choice to commit another Nazi-like crime in the form of introducing nuclear warfare. They made a choice to let many, many Soviets die. All of that was to preserve private wealth. The World War II decade kind of ended, but in the fog of war, this red decade, this unstoppable world revolution. It's, I think, correct to think of now the 2030s as a similarly momentous decade. But the real dynamics and determining factors there, of course, remain unknown. An accelerating pace of AI development, a real AI explosion, intelligence explosion, artificial general intelligence, superintelligence, AI takeoff effects are a near certainty for the 2030s. The question then is, how will we turn this into something that avoids the most calamitous outcomes as we all stand on this razor's edge that I described, that we are on because of the problems of the capitalist climate apocalypse and the bourgeois AI takeoff. So this new cultural universal for the 2030s should not be elitist lie or traditional something some kind of traditionalist form. It should not be any kind of false utopian artifice or rigid doctrine. So what could we say of this God building 2.0? It should be focused on internationalism, centering human dignity and the well-being of all humanity. In this age of an advanced computing takeoff, this means rejecting private wealth, most particularly, rejecting this liberal technocracy that's quickly turning the corner to just unabashed techno-fascism of the United States, and affirming that the benefits of automation must be distributed, and intelligence must serve the well-being of all, in the way that I described moments ago, of the people's superintelligence being steered by workers, whether or not that ultimately is a requirement for its functioning. This framework must find a way to inspire a sense of global community and mutual responsibility, and move away from the problem that emerged since the Red Decade of nationalism dominating such thinking. Nationalism is poison. Poison. You can say, well, it's not fair to equate the nationalism of the oppressed with the nationalism of the oppressor. Yeah, that's true, but it's still not so good as a general rule. Another thing that should be focused on for this the 2030s being this time for God building 2.0 and time for an intelligence explosion would be the embracing of legitimate post-scarcity outcomes which really requires the provisioning of universal basic services to all people on a triage basis, right? There are people who are pretty far in the global south, billions of people who are pretty far from having their needs met. A billion people who, in 2025, live desperately short and horrible lives because they have not access to suitable potable water, proper food, other necessaries of life, because this is the ravages of private wealth. We could easily have, as Thomas Sankara said, drinking water for all, but we've opted instead to have champagne for a few. Um, but a richer understanding of these problems must be a feature of these cultural universals. So the potential for something like using high automation correctly for the provisioning of universal basic services and other uh, good utilities, it must be the focus. And I guess a word that people use to describe this is fully automated luxury communism. That's not my favorite word because that book itself was written by a person who's associated with the neoliberal friendly think tank in the UK, and the people who are associated with the fully automated luxury communist movement are people who are tending to be too pacifistic. There are people who are basically saying, as the thesis of this book kind of is pretty easily understood, you should wait for these neoliberal monsters to fully automate your economy and then accept the gift from them of luxury communism. That is not something that the bourgeoisie has ever done. It's not something that they're doing right now, insofar as this creep from a liberal technocracy, which has many failings, as bourgeois institutions will, to outright techno-fascism, which is worse still, but basically still just the same bourgeois problem. Um, they're never going to just get rid of wage slavery and start helping you. All right, that's not something that private wealth is capable of. Even if any individual actor within operating within that system does genuinely want that, it's just not what they're capable of. This fundamental thing of full automation as a transition to communism must become a foundational cultural truth, must echo throughout the hills in every land. This new universal must inspire a radical reevaluation of work and purpose. I would consider a person who is part of people's superintelligence doing 1 hour of work a week and playing video games the rest of the time, but hosting an AI, basically hosting AI agents who are able to work on their behalf to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse and build wonders beyond. Um, that's when that structure is in the many millions, that wonders well beyond stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse. That's a good worker, right? In a way that the person that you think, oh, the doctor, the lawyer, the accountant, in the United States is the typical taxpayer who's associated with being a good worker. And that's not a good worker, right? That's a person who's upholding the omnicidal system that's killing the planet. It's a bad worker. um, and so this understanding what actually should and must emerge for humans to survive it requires a fundamental reevaluation of concepts in labor. Um, it also is the kind of thing that celebrates the creativity of the masses, the intellectual curiosity of the masses, and allows for leisure, right? Why should people in this high automation framework have to work more hours than human beings historically worked in other eras? It makes no sense, right? It's just a solidifying of this incipient and now visibly emerging techno-fascism. Um, we must replace these flawed bourgeois institutions with conceptions and demands for a universal abundance and the masses able to have this self-realization, which again, it's there's no self-realization for the wage slave. There is self-realization, however, for the person receiving universal basic services and able to then do a better class of work as a result, such as being this worker in the People's Superintelligence. Maybe they work 1 hour a week, and that is multiplied by 50 or 500 into 500 AI man hours. By the 2030s, let's say 500 by standards of today, maybe 50 or less. Um, um, maybe they work tirelessly. Maybe they work 60 hours a week in this, and their efforts are even more dramatically multiplied. That's great. Um, there is no moving toward this by having military-industrial tied firms and for-profit concerns and institutions controlling what we define as technological progress. These people are criminals, right? The genesis of neoliberalism, really, more than anything, was the U.S.'s a fascistic attack on Salvador Allende in Chile, which, among other things, was designed to undermine a technological planned economy of cybersyn, which would have been invariably a springboard to some other people's superintelligence or AI takeoff that would have occurred decades ago, maybe around the year 2000, were it not for this malign influence of this U.S. Ringleader of anti-communism. So these neoliberals of today, the neoliberal technologists of today, they have the same worldview as those early neoliberals. They do the same kinds of things, and they're all, from Kissinger forward. You know, Kissinger's last book was something he co-wrote with Eric Schmidt, a major corrupter of the Google organization, as far as it becoming more fascistic than it was, more aligned with the military-industrial complex, more just a product of the CIA-run world than it was. These are all invariably people who are taking one step forward, most visibly. Oh, look what you've done. We put little mustaches on you. You love having a little mustache that you didn't have before because of digital technology. Who cares about a fucking mustache? Most of what is passed as technological progress is things of little interest. Visibly taking one step forward, but on a closer analysis, taking 2 steps back. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That's what the neoliberal technologists, that's what all of these TESCREAL people represent. That's what they represent in terms of things like the provisioning of universal basic services. I give this example of this guy, Zoltan Istvin, who's somebody I had something verging on a working relationship with a few years ago before I really started to understand some of these problems. And this is a person who has, people who I met in this time, they encouraged me, you should read Zoltan Istvin's work, so I did. It was not a real good idea. But he'd written a lot of essays to do, and basically a whole book to do with universal basic income. And he ran for president as a candidate, as I did a few years after him, for a while, as a basic income candidate. But then what happened in 2020, there were lockdowns for just a few days because of which was a mistake. They should have been there should have been lockdowns at the airlines and other kinds of safety measures, and we would have never even heard of coronavirus if that had occurred. But that would have been taking some money out of the pocket of for-profit airlines and other criminals. So we can't do that. So we let millions and millions of people die, including millions of Americans. And so what was Zoltan Istvin? In 2020, this was a time when a person who was a basic income public-facing individual could have been saying, well, now is when we roll out basic income, when we're locking people down. But that would have been flying in the face of the neoliberal mandate protecting private wealth above all else and creating a wage slave system. So that's not what Zoltan Istvan was doing. Because what Zoltan Istvan was doing when he was advocating for universal basic income was advocating for it in the abstract, a fascist limited hangout, taking on one good thing that seems to be pro-worker, when actually what you're really doing is just using it as cover for your anti-worker activities. And so when the possibility of basic income became more real and less abstract, he jettisoned all of the universal basic income rhetoric, and all he was talking about all day, 20, 30 tweets a day, and so forth, was that lockdowns would slow the technological singularity, which, as you know, my analysis of the neoliberal technologist, that's nonsense. But it doesn't matter that this person is pretty clearly a liar, or that people like this generally. It's not just him, right? It's just everybody in this TESCREAL world, this tech-focused world of the U.S. It doesn't really, they're just obvious liars, right? Because they have a patina of legitimacy politics and institutionalized legitimacy that gives them broad latitude to just keep fucking up and shitting the bed, and it doesn't matter, they're still in their positions of power. Zoltan Istvan is not a uniquely powerful person in this world of technologists, but all of the technologists more substantial than him share these same failings. And many of them have also advocated for basic income and then advocated for the opposite in early 2020. We have to reject this incipient techno-fascism and build a global movement for truly advanced technology that can end unsustainability, violence, and exploitation once and for all. You can easily enter into 2030s, just as there could have been a world revolution in the 1930s. We could easily enter a world where military-industrial complexes are a thing of the past. The destructive qualities of petrochemical concerns are brought down to a very low level. We could have the near abolition tomorrow of petrochemical products, except for those percentage of those which would be necessary to avoid things like a supply chain collapse. And a similar approach could be taken to livestock systems. But we could build a livable world almost immediately. But that requires that millions and millions of people are fighting, pretty particularly for the abolition of private wealth, and pretty particularly for the set of eco-communist and cybernetic communist strategies that I tend to describe on this show. So this coming decade is our last chance to avoid the billion-person or more loss of life in the capitalist climate apocalypse. It's a last chance to build a coherent cultural framework and this cultural set of universals that can guide us to, as people say, I take, and that should be thought of, I think, in terms. And I hope that you'll take the time to learn more about God building in Soviet history, this fight to build a humane and sustainable world. It's not winnable unless we are willing to fight for a humane and sustainable economic system, such as that described in the cybernetic communist program of this show. And that requires not just philosophy, first and foremost. It requires a merging of philosophy and action and praxis. And it requires the masses to embrace this. It requires many millions of people to be willing to stand up to these bourgeois governments and corporations and bring them to an end so that human beings can survive. They have no interest in their own survival, right? So you taking militant action against them does no more harm to them than what they're doing to themselves and yourself. The only thing that you can really do in this situation is self-preservation. The opposite response is the response of most people. They say, well, I don't care if workers die, but I am really concerned if a billionaire or a billionaire mouthpiece like Charlie Kirk dies. That's utter insanity, right? These people have to be put down. They absolutely have to be put down because the system that they operate in gives no other alternative to continued human existence. It gives no other options of open warfare against these kind of forces of the bourgeois government and corporation. And You're not doing anyone a disservice by saying this or by taking action on that basis. You're doing yourself a grave disservice by confusing this and by insinuating moral or physical cowardice into the conversation or just parroting bourgeois philosophy in response to it. But as I say on this program pretty routinely, the concerns of stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse, while considerable, are not the only thing that derives from something like building a people's superintelligence. We can, with many millions of people in this people's superintelligence workforce multiplying formation, we can see other things like the provisioning of universal basic services to every land on a triage basis at first, but quite quickly then in this AI takeoff framework to everyone the world around. And then once these two things are done, avoiding the omnicide and seeing that everyone has their basic needs met, then we can focus and begin to benefit from the state of advanced biomedicine, such as biogerontology and related fields, and applying that to the running of a single-payer public health service and turning it into an AI-powered single-payer public health service that's able to treat increasingly more conditions, including the ravages of age, which would basically then lead to a universal super longevity. Everyone reaching what's called a longevity escape velocity, a point where they're no longer really aging because the ravages of age have been medically dealt with, as have other conditions. So that a thing which would have sounded absurd to anyone, almost anyone, before the year 2000, is something that is pretty easily attainable in a people's superintelligent framework for the 2030s. And what happens when you have those three things done? When everyone's able to live as long as they want, when everyone has all of their basic needs met, and when there's no risk of the capitalist climate apocalypse because things have been dramatically changed, and because the AI takeoff, pretty specifically, these problems have been mediated, what happens next? What's the next order of business for the people's superintelligence? I don't know. I'm not that clever that I can really anticipate that. What the thing that would be most beneficial would be. People say, well, then you go to Mars or something. Then you can colonize a moon or something. Then you can go to infinity and beyond. They just kind of make it more abstract because no one really knows. But the point is, whatever the thing that's the fourth most pro-social set of goals in that people's superintelligent framework turns out to be, that is all achievable in your lifetime with the use of applied cybernetic communist institutions, with the use of this million plus workforce multiplier of AI agents, able to spearhead things like public works projects that bourgeois governments and corporations are incapable of. And that leads to things well beyond your expectations of today. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day, you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, very soon, my dear comrade, cybernetic communism will win. Thank you.